Welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast, where we address the challenges and the opportunities of midlife from a uniquely Catholic perspective. This is the time, my friends, for a deeper renewal of your Christian vocation. Come and enter into the freedom of Christ that allows you to be the person you were created to be, because there's an amazing, awesome, exciting next season of life waiting for you.
Hello, welcome to Catholic Midlife Podcast. It's great to be here with you. I'm Curtis. I'm here with Karen.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here as well.
What are we hearing from listeners this week, Karen?
Well, this is actually not from a listener, but someone did share this. My daughter thinks I don't respect her personal boundaries. At least that's what she wrote in her diary.
Ooh.
This is a joke that goes with our topic. That's why we picked it.
What else you got?
Okay. What do you say when your therapist suggests you actually start setting boundaries with people in your life? You say, well, I'm much more comfortable criticizing people behind their backs. That was a beam or something.
That's a joke, right?
It's a joke. Yeah. Yes, it is a joke. Thank you. So you may be able to infer that we're talking about boundaries this season of the Catholic Midlife Podcast.
So, Karen, you told me you were kind of avoiding the boundary as a topic in the podcast. So why was that?
Yes. I've been thinking about this topic for a long time because it really is super important. And it's also extremely complicated. I think we have a lot of trouble knowing how to apply these in our lives. So I just was avoiding it because I wanted to be really careful with it and not confuse people further by talking about the whole issue.
Yeah, and also, really, it's not good to stir people's angst up and not give them clear answers.
Yes.
So we'll try to avoid creating angst.
We will.
But our listeners will judge how successful we are.
And ultimately, if you're listening to this season and you're thinking to yourself, in any episode, I've got some boundaries I should work through. We just encourage you to find people that you can work through that with, who can give you some objective space to think through what's going to be the best for you. So if something comes up for you, follow that up. Take it as a sign that there's some growth here that can happen.
Well, it really is such an important area to understand, and it cuts across a lot of areas of spiritual and mental and emotional life. So it's actually very important to our Christian life to have some understanding, some capability in this area, because this is an area that really holds us back.
It's really true. I mean, if we have calls in our Christian life. We have vocations of different sorts. We have mission, and we only have a limited amount of everything: time, energy, emotional wherewithal, that we only have a limited amount. So if we don't have proper boundaries, we're not going to be able to fulfill the things that we are truly being asked to do in this life.
That's right, Karen. And we're going to talk about, I think we're going to get to all these things in this season of podcasts. Okay. I don't know how many. Boundaries, what are they? Where do Christians get stuck? Because confusing and overlapping.
Yeah, anyway. No, what we think about being a Christian can seem to be conflicting with boundaries sometimes.
Thanks. You had this really blank look on your face. Thought, it didn't quite sound right. But also, how do we know that maybe we don't have good boundaries? Because I really think a lot of them are not conscious.
Yeah, I agree.
And what do you do when your boundaries are getting broken? And of course, there's different areas of life. And then there's just all the baggage around the boundary issues.
There's tons of baggage around
Tons of baggage. And that can prevent us from, taking effective and charitable action.
Awesome. So if you've never really thought about this issue before, now's the time.
All right, Karen, I bet you're going to start us off with some definitions.
Oh, you know me well. Yes. And there are several. I think it's helpful to think about this actually from a number of different perspectives. So here's one definition. Boundaries define what is me and what is not me, where I begin and where I end, what is my job or responsibility and what is not. And the typical image that people throw out for this is, you have property and you have to know what the boundaries of your property are. You have a fence around your property because that tells you, okay, here's where I end and my neighbor begins.
Yeah. So what does this mean? Where I begin and where I end?
Well, on the one hand, right, we're given responsibilities to steward. We're stewards. We hear that even from the beginning in Genesis. That's part of our vocation and role, is to be stewards in this life. And we have to know what it is that we're stewarding. I mean, we're not being asked to steward everything because that would be impossible. Each individual is being asked to steward something. So if you don't know what that is, and it's getting like mixed up with what other people are being asked to steward, that is extremely confusing.
Well, I hear this: boundaries define where I begin and where I end, or what is me and what is not me. I just find that confusing language. Right.
So a little more clarification. Okay. So here's an example. I'm a person, I have emotions. You are a person, you have emotions.
Okay, I'm with you so far.
Okay. I'm responsible for my emotions and my emotional life, my emotional needs, for processing emotions. You are responsible for your emotions and your emotional life and your emotional needs and processing your emotions and releasing your emotions when you need to. I am not responsible for yours. You are not responsible for mine.
Okay, now that's a great example. It makes me think of, a family system where somebody's really sensitive and everybody's responsible for, say, mom's emotion.
Right.
So if brother says something that, lights up mom's emotion, then sister and dad get mad at brother. Well, you shouldn't upset your mother like that.
Okay. That's a good example. Whereas in understanding emotional boundaries, mom is responsible for mom's emotions.
Yeah. And I don't want to oversimplify this. Of course, there's button pushers and there's really unhelpful ways to deal with sensitive issues. Yet at the same time, we can't be responsible for other people's emotions. We can't take that on. We can try to help them if we may.
And we can't make other people responsible for our emotions either. That's not taking responsibility for something that is within our sphere of responsibility.
Right. Okay. So this is making sense. Where I begin, where I end, where you begin. So I'm a helper and you have a problem.
Ooh, this is classic.
And it's tough. It feels like my problem because you're somebody I care about.
Yep.
Or somebody I could see, maybe you're very close to me or not, but I'm worried about you and you've got this problem and it's bugging me. I'm going to get in there and give you a hand with it.
Yeah. I'm going to want to take on your problem and make sure you fix it.
Yeah.
And this is a really classic thing that happens with people who are helpers is they help and help and help and want to fix everybody's problems. And they have a big burnout at some point because you really cannot physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually take on other people's problems that aren't within your sphere of stewardship without having a breakdown eventually.
Right. That's right.
And then you kind of walk back and start to set your boundaries at some point and have to do the work of learning how to figure out what they should be, how you're going to communicate them, how you're going to uphold them, because nobody's going to be happy when so-and-so isn't coming around to fix all their problems anymore.
Yeah. Disrupting those patterns. So that's a real classic kind of boundary.
Yeah, we should
That's
talk
really
about
hard.
that this season, like what people might do when you set a boundary and how to respond.
So often it comes back to knowing what's within our control, what's within our influence,
Yes.
what we can change, what we can't change. And
Exactly.
so, I mean, what's within my boundaries?
Well, we just talked about emotions. My emotions are within my boundaries and your emotions are not. My beliefs, my attitudes, my values, my behaviors and actions, the choices I make, the limits I set, my thoughts, what I think, my resources, okay, my time, my energy, my money, my gifts, what I've been given as a human being, and how I'm going to allocate that, the things that I want, my desires, and my capacity to love, how I choose to love, whom I choose to love, and where I'm being called to love. That's all within my responsibility.
Right. So you have the freedom to love because you have boundaries. You're able to choose how to focus your energies and choose what you're going to invest in.
Yes. And I want to make that point again, which you just said, Curtis, because it's really important. My boundaries serve my capacity to love. My boundaries serve my capacity to use my resources wisely. Boundaries serve my choices, what I've already decided I'm going to do. So, I have to have the boundaries on the road so I don't go wandering off in the countryside and get distracted from my destination. Boundaries enable us to be who we were meant to be, to do what we're meant to do, and to have the things that we need to be who we're meant to be.
That reminds me of the classic work boundary.
Yeah, what's that?
Well, it's simply work can absorb us.
Yes.
And some workplaces really have a culture for that. And frankly, it can be hard to have a lot of success in some work cultures if you have work boundaries.
Oh, totally. I mean, I was just reading, I think it was Bank of America. They were sending people to the hospital because they weren't getting any sleep because they were working all the time and their bosses expected them to be on call 24/7. I mean, it just sounded like a horrific boundaryless work culture. I don't think you could work there if you had any boundaries on your career. I mean, no wonder it's so detrimental to the people's well-being.
At the same time, though, usually in the work environment, it is possible to have strong boundaries. They're going to get you home and preserve your home life. It's a matter of being able to create them because people, a place like that, a job, it's going to take everything you give it.
That's a good
There's
point.
no limit to what it wants. So often it is possible to succeed with having some suitable boundaries.
One good point, I think, to support that is I'm responsible for setting my own limits and boundaries. I can't expect my workplace to do that for me. Obviously, I want to choose a workplace that's going to work with my boundaries, but it's not their job to create my boundaries.
Right. It's my job.
Yeah.
So that paternalistic work culture that tells you exactly, what to do and all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact,
it's not going to cut it.
This is jumping ahead a little bit. We're not really going to get into this today, but if you're finding yourself kind of at the mercy of any group or organization, it can be your workplace, it can be your church, it can be your family. That's a sign that you may need to take a good look at some boundaries here and what you're not doing to set the boundaries.
Yeah, take a look because all this gets very particular.
Yeah.
Which is kind of one reason you avoided the topic, I think, because it's very situational. And sometimes you have to go all out in your service because of your situation. Yet it is a sign to take a look. And this just brings up the whole boundaries thing. I remember, so as a lawyer, a lot of the times you can be in a situation where the firm has a client and it's your turn to help that client with whatever it is. And you're under tremendous pressure to keep that client happy because it's the firm's client, it's part of the business. But I had a rule that I wouldn't humiliate myself for money. So it got to the point where there were just some things I just wouldn't let them pass, even if it put that relationship at risk. And you can guess how I learned how to create that boundary, right? Is having some experiences where I just thought, man, I am not going to do that again. I can't live like that.
Right. So you experienced the disorder, and then it was pretty motivating to set the boundary.
Yeah, and I was willing to, take the risk and to stand up for just my dignity and when it came up.
Right. I think that's the way a lot of us learn our boundaries, is when they are crossed in a super big way. And then we recognize, okay, this is a boundary for me. I think it can be super helpful even to try to be a little proactive in that area and think about what our boundaries are in any area of life, and consider the boundaries that we're going to be really interested in preserving.
Yeah. So on the work thing, you kind of lit me up a little bit.
Oh, okay.
So one of my other boundaries was, if we're in some kind of group situation, it's us and them, it's our client and opposing counsel or whatever. I wouldn't let attacks on my integrity or my client's integrity go unchallenged. So I wouldn't just let them say things about our character. I would stop the whole call and I'd push back right then and there, because you couldn't, A, you shouldn't put up with it, and B, you can't let somebody else create that tone.
Right.
And because then they're going to start pushing you around.
You are really quite good at this, Curtis, because I remember being in a situation once in a group meeting, and somebody said something, and it was like, sometimes you're like, okay, something just shifted or happened. I'm not totally sure what it was. But afterwards, I thought, Curtis would have said something very important at that point in time and not let things go down that road. And so that's really a powerful skill you have, honey.
Thanks. It's too bad you can't remember exactly what that was. But it can be important to just simply stop the group and just push back for a moment. And you don't usually have to derail the whole thing. Anyway.
You're really good at gently but firmly drawing a line. And that's a kind of an important point. Boundaries don't have to have a lot of negative emotion. Usually you have all the negative emotion because A, you didn't realize you had a boundary and you let yourself be rolled over. B, you had one, but you never communicated it, so the other person didn't know. And you just let it repeatedly get crossed for so long that you just blow up. And then you have all the negativity. But boundaries don't need to be that way.
Boy, that's a great point. If you're nursing that resentment, that anger, the frustration, maybe there's some kind of boundary that's being pushed. It could be an internal boundary, like if the Vikings aren't having a good season and that's ruining your emotional outlook, maybe you need a little boundary in there. So when Sunday afternoon's over, you can get on with your life.
Yeah. Or you have a neighbor who keeps borrowing stuff and it doesn't get taken care of, or it doesn't get returned, and they keep asking. And you get really irate because they keep asking, but you keep lending. And then eventually you might be like, I've had it. I'm not even talking to this guy anymore. And you've totally ruined a relationship, really, because you didn't set a boundary around lending your things.
Except for books. Those really don't have to be returned, right?
I may not notice that they're gone till I really want a certain book and I'm looking for it.
Okay, our cat's on the table looking hungry, so let's wrap this show up, Karen.
Before she takes it over. Yes. Well, before we go, we're going to obviously have quite a few episodes on this, and one thing you can start thinking about is maybe just pick an area of life, okay? Like marriage or family or work or service at church, and just think, what are my boundaries in this area? Do I even know what they are? Could I tell somebody else about them?
Ooh, that sounds a good one. So we'd always love to hear from you. What are your thoughts? What are your experiences in this boundary area? Email us at thecatholicmidlife@gmail.com. Thanks for being here with us. The Catholic Midlife Podcast is for anyone that wants to receive the abundance of life that God has for each one of us. Take a moment right now to tell a friend about us.